I'll start the discussion directly about the topic of democratization of drones, and also start discussing with each of our speakers. So first of all, here is Jonathan, and Alexander, and David. Do you guys want to introduce yourself first? Introduce yourselves, yeah.
Sure, I'm Jonathan. I'm the founder and CEO of Airware. Have been in the drone space for about 12 years, first at MIT, then at Boeing, working on the development of the A160T Hummingbird, one of the first 3 large autonomous systems to fly in US airspace. Started Airware about 6 years ago because I saw a technology that was becoming available in a form factor and at a price point that it would be able to address commercial applications, but where most of the companies in the space were really focused on the drones themselves. We saw the need for an enterprise software stack that was going to be able to take the data collected by drones and make it actionable business intelligence for large enterprises. And so that's what we're focused on doing today. We're about 100 people based in San Francisco and in Paris, focused on delivering a complete end-to-end solution to large enterprises in the insurance industry and in kind of all the dirt-moving industries of quarrying, mining, and construction. In the insurance industry, we're working with many of the top 10 carriers, both in North America and in Europe, to help them transform the way they do things like residential claims and commercial building underwriting. And in the mining industry, helping companies really enhance both safety and compliance on their sites, but also better understand and drive increases in productivity.
Yeah. Alexander?
I'm Alexander Harmsen, CEO, founder of Iris Automation. And we're building computer vision, collision avoidance systems for industrial drones. And I mean, we see this huge benefit on the side of mining exploration, pipeline inspection, package delivery, and a lot of what Joseph just said in terms of flying beyond line of sight, flying completely autonomously in national airspace is going to require real-time situational awareness. I mean, as a VFR pilot, as someone that has flown a lot in the past, there's a lot of flight there that's non-cooperative, that's not always going to be caught by some sort of transponder solution. And being able to have that real-time situational awareness on board aircraft is always going to be necessary. Just like self-driving cars, you're always going to need some sort of way to, in the moment, figure out if there's other aircraft, if there's buildings, cell phone towers, anything like that. And that's what started us on this path down to this full real-time situational awareness system. And it's completely computer vision based, very low cost, very efficient, and I mean, most of it's software based to allow it to integrate with any aircraft on the market.
Thank you. And David?
Yeah, I am David Lyman. I'm co-founder and CEO of BetterView. We're also based here in the Bay Area. Our entry into it was my co-founder and I we're trying to solve a very specific problem. Dave grew up, his dad was a commercial building inspector, or ran a company that does commercial building inspections for the insurance industry. Dave took that business over a decade ago, and one of the problems that his customers were continually coming to him with was, we need more information about roofs. We need more roof data on these commercial building inspections. So David actually tried a series of experiments before the drone, painter's poles. He had one company wanted him to outfit all 600 inspectors with ladders. And that didn't seem like a great idea. It was dangerous and would just add a lot of cost and time to the workflow. So the drone was just the latest experiment. So in 2014 we got together, and my background is in enterprise software, previously built and sold a startup. And so I said, hey, look, let's go out and do some of this work. So our start was really going out for these commercial insurance inspections, going out and flying the roof, capturing a bunch of data, analyzing it, and then returning that. And we found that worked. So once we decided the use case was really working well, we started building more and more technology to support that, and kind of fast forward a couple of years, and we have a variety of ways to capture the data, but really the focus has always been for us on, I think similar to what Jonathan's saying is get the imagery in, but then really derive the context from it. How do we turn raw data in the form of imagery into real actionable, useful information?
Thank you. And from my side, my name is Kostas Alexis. The last almost 2 years, I'm professor in robotics at the University of Nevada, Reno. Before coming to the United States, I was in Zurich, Switzerland, at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. And I will start directly discussion now, asking Jonathan. They estimate almost $125 billion market as drones as a service, doing an application. And a lot of it depends on enabling the flight, an automated flight, an autonomous flight inside a particular environment. But what do you think are the milestones in terms of autonomy, as well as in terms of data analysis, to actually reach this market forecast that they estimate?
Yeah, so over the last couple of years, we've really seen the focus go from the drones themselves and can you capture a certain type of imagery or a certain type of data to really, I think the focus right now is what are the business outcomes that you can drive with this, and what is kind of the ROI over certain repayment timeframes for companies as they're thinking about adopting this as a new technology, but also potentially changing some of their business processes to really benefit from the new technology. And in terms of milestones that we're seeing, I think over the last year, we've already seen a big change from the need for experts and pilots to fly drones, which in the United States was both mandated by the FAA under the regulatory structure, but also the technology was somewhat inaccessible. You really needed that expertise to be able to operate it safely. And I would say we're already seeing this year that materially change. People are using iPad applications. They can be trained in a matter of a couple of hours to be a safe operator of the technology now from the FAA, and as a result of Part 107, which came out last summer, you just need to pass a pretty easy to pass class, be trained on some basic rules of the road and airspace requirements, and you can be a safety observer. And increasingly, all of the applications that we're seeing done, especially in the commercial arena, involves virtually entirely autonomous flight of the drone. So the person needs to be there to make sure the batteries are charged, make sure the area is a safe area to operate in, go through a quick checklist, launch the drone, but pretty much from start to finish, the drone is flying entirely autonomously. The person may be trained to take over under a certain set of conditions, like if the drone is going to collide with something or a manned aircraft does come into the area. But we're already seeing the autonomy is there in a significant degree, and that's going to continue to evolve, and via machine vision and other technologies is going to enable that to operate eventually beyond visual line of sight to address a broader set of applications and just increasingly take the human out of the loop.
Right. And for example, if we had to consider the fact that most of the applications that really matter often are in very dense urban environments, and you have to deal with collision avoidance and so on and so forth, what will be the fundamental challenges, for example, degraded conditions, operation in darkness for many safety applications, for example, avoidance of manned aircraft, both from a technical perspective as well as from the perspective of the society accepting the drones operating in such an environment. So let's start from the technical side with you, Alexander.
Sure. A big part of that is trust. And trust comes in a number of different forms. I think part of that trust is just experience and flight heritage in that market. The more it happens, the longer we see these technologies in play, the more likely the public is to trust it, the more likely regulators are to trust it. But of course that takes time, and the drone industry is moving a lot faster than that permits. So part of it is also trust on the technology side. And one of the things that we saw was that, these drones are very capable already. Like Jonathan said, a lot of it is already completely automated. It's not really the technology itself that's holding us back. We can allow these drones to fly GPS coordinates. We can allow them to do package delivery kilometers through the mountains. And I used to work for Matternet, and I was one of the early software engineers there, and we had fully autonomous operation, and we were flying in Bhutan, 20 kilometers through the mountains. That technology isn't really there, but it was very clear that to bring that to the US, to bring it to developed countries, we needed to be able to actually trust that if it was to actually be on its own in national airspace, that it could avoid other things, that it could make real-time decisions while it was flying. I think that's a big part of it. The trust comes in the form of existing systems. I think we've seen huge change on the consumer side of drones, and there's a lot of applications on this industrial side, like you pointed to, everything from package delivery to human transportation in cities, but probably where we first start seeing real beyond visual line of sight automated testing is in mining or sort of rural package delivery or it's agricultural surveys, or forest management, or search and rescue, mining exploration, things like this that are, it makes a lot of sense to do that in rural environments already. And I think with any technology, you need to build it up in the safest areas first, adopt that, and then eventually spread it into the denser areas where maybe that's more useful down the road.
And I'll come back to that afterwards in a second. But for example, apart from the drone, David, apart from the robot itself flying around, executing a GPS coordinated mission or not, what do you think are the most important challenges and milestones when it comes to the data analytics, when it comes to getting the data, inferring decisions, and giving comprehensive results to the end user?
Yeah, I mean, the key is that information that we provide them is usable, right? Is usable in a workflow. They have the ability to request it. They have their ability, once it gets returned, to be able to analyze it, make a decision off of it. And also, like in our case, for all these inspection use cases, you need to get consent on the ground. So there's a lot of logistical considerations that need to be coordinated. And then coordinating also with existing workforce. So, we have a network of pilots all over the country who go out and fly and capture imagery. But we also offer the ability for our customers, there are times when they're already out in the field, they should be carrying a drone as well. And I don't think it's necessarily this like either or. There are going to be people who are out there with a drone. They're capturing data all day long. They're going from one spot to the next, to the next, to the next. And there's going to be other use cases where people who are out in the field already, they have a drone in their back of their truck, and they pull it out once a day, once a week, something like that, right? So I think those are kind of some of the key considerations we think of is how do we make ourselves compatible with existing workflows.
Right. Question to all of you. United States, very regulated airspace and certain industry. Europe, a little bit more relaxed about the utilization of drones in the airspace. And China, a huge market. So where do you think the progress, how do you think about the progress of integrating drones in real life applications for the three different markets? And let's start with you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think Europe is unquestionably ahead of the US in this area. It's one of the reasons we acquired a company last year that's based out of Paris, because both France as well as the UK and many other countries in Europe are much further ahead, have been doing commercial operations for 4 years or more in many cases, have carved out rules that allow people to do beyond visual line of sight operations already. And I think Europe has generally taken the approach where, let's start with a set of, rules for operating drones that seem reasonable, and then let's learn from them and let's evolve them and change them as needed. In the US, on the other hand, we've kind of started with a no drone operations at all, except for explicit waiver, and then are kind of slowly adding rules that allow people to operate the drone technology. And we're doing so, quite frankly, pretty slowly. And I would say behind the rest of the world. We don't have operations in Asia, but I know from speaking with other founders and CEOs of companies, they're just seeing a rapid proliferation of the use of this technology throughout large parts of Asia. And so I would say it's likely that continent is ahead of us as well.
Mm-hmm.
We started originally in Canada, and I think even for the last 10, 15 years, Canada has been largely ahead of the US in terms of allowing drones to fly beyond line of sight or allow them to fly in cities. And the US is quickly catching up to that. But I do feel like in general the FAA has been behind on a lot of these integrations, partly because the airspace is so complex and partly just because there's a lot more space in places like Canada or developing countries, or we've looked at Australia a lot. And when we're talking to customers now, even in the last year and a half, we've seen a huge switch from these customers, these drone companies not being allowed to fly anywhere, and now suddenly they're getting waivers, and the FAA and NASA, they're starting to allow special flights. They're looking very heavily at technology through a number of different test sites in the country. And there's a certain point where a precedent gets set, and we're a part of that as well, to be able to try and show that the technology is far enough advanced to actually allow safe operation. And I think once that happens for a fair amount of time, then that becomes the new standard, and essentially we have another big jump like what happened with Part 107 in September last year.
David, any further
Yeah, I
comment?
mean, we've really stayed focused in on the U.S. simply because we're doing enough work to collect enough data that the analysis, the building out the analysis capability is our biggest focus, and so we'd love more volume, but we're always working building up the business, but there's enough right now to be able to support what we need to do there. So I think, it's not something we really think too much about because the analysis tools, there's a lot, I think the technology in general is developing, the regulations are developing as well, and as those continue to get better, there's more collision avoidance built into the drones, and it becomes cheaper and easier. The overall pie, the market globally expands tremendously.
Right.
One of the interesting dynamics in the space is the US and North America are such earlier adopters of technology than a lot of the rest of the world in some really key areas, especially in cloud-based data processing and analytics in general. We have this weird dichotomy where companies in North America and large enterprises in North America are already in the cloud. They're already using all of these other cloud-based tools, and so being able to leverage aerial data and drone-based data in the cloud, the North America, we're behind on adoption and use of commercial drone technology. We're ahead on cloud technology, and then when you go to other countries and other areas of the world, they may be ahead in using drones, but they're actually way behind in some cases in actually adopting cloud technology and moving some of this critical information and decision making to the cloud and collaborating it on it there. And they're doing things like printing off information collected by drones. They're doing things like storing terabytes of data on physical drives in the office collected by drones. And it'll be interesting to see kind of which side catches up to the other in terms of closing that whole loop.
And we have at least two big markets, right? Enterprise market and consumer market. How do you see the projections for each one of them? And where are you focusing in particular? And how do you see the United States, for example, particularly focusing on one or the other directions in terms of market allocation? And again, forward.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the time frame to potentially build a company in North America that's going to be producing drones in any way has come and has passed. All the successful companies that are manufacturing drones are most all based in Asia, vertically integrated, doing what a lot of the companies in that part of the world do best. I think one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years is really the replacement of kind of purpose-built industrial drones in commercial applications by consumer drones, because the consumer drones have frankly become good enough for most commercial applications, where what you're trying to do is collect either visual, infrared, multispectral data, and then do what is often kind of commercial application focused and enterprise focused analysis of that data and making it useful, like David mentioned. But the drones themselves are very much becoming just like our phones. The phone that we use at home for consumer applications is the phone that we bring to work, and we load enterprise applications onto it.
Yeah, I think very well put. Actually, what brought me into the business, I talked about the background story of why we did, focused on insurance, roof inspections, based on my co-founder's background. But the reason I was even looking at drones as a new business opportunity was I bought a 3D robotics Iris and I bought a DJI Phantom. And the difference between those two, and I think we know why DJI won, is that you pulled the DJI Phantom out of the box and it was just ready to go. And at the time they didn't have a software development kit yet. You couldn't build applications on top of it, but the original iPhone you couldn't either. And so, and I was involved in that whole progression of things back, a decade ago, and said, DJI is clearly going to build an SDK. We're going to be able to build applications on top of it. And this consumer technology, as it's being built, works great to go fly over buildings and capture information data that you can then have something useful. I mean, I flew over my own roof and found some ice dams, and the shingles were ripped up, and it was something that a roofer had been up a few months earlier and totally missed. He just didn't walk over to that side of the roof, even though he told me he had done a full, thorough inspection. And so that's kind of on the topic of democratization. When I reached back out to him, he said, well, I'm going to have to come back out. I'm going to have to get on your roof and to be able to give you a quote. I don't know what it's going to cost. So I said, hey, let me shoot you an email with some photos. Sent him the photos, and he came back right away with a number, or a really tight range. I sent it out to some more roofers and got numbers. So to me, that's where the democratization comes in, is that it can be hard to get professional opinions, get them quickly, get them efficiently. It impacts how we are able to service these buildings. So, like, ultimately, we're inspecting because we're really trying to drive a successful resolution, right? Find the problems, and solve them before they become catastrophic. And I think that's where things get really interesting with what the potential of drones are for society's benefit.
I think one of the key parts is what was just said, in that a lot of that hardware has become democratized, a lot of it's become commoditized, and it's extremely easy to just build a drone off the shelf. Even either you buy it from DJI or one of these bigger consumer companies, or you buy a couple different components and for less than $1,000 you just put something together yourself. I think when it comes, there's a huge difference between the consumer industry and this industrial commercial industry. And like even the commercial industry is sort of broken up into what you can do line of sight, what you can do with roof inspections or on a mining site or surveying. And then there's sort of this other side which is more industrial. And we're talking about huge, like $100 billion natural resource sectors in agriculture or mining or oil and gas or forestry. And for a lot of them, the big part is lateral inspection. And we haven't quite touched that yet because of a lot of its national airspace. In these industries, they don't really care how fancy the drones are. They care about the usable data, they care about safety, they care about integration and how easy it is for them to use that. And I think there is a big shift happening there where for them, the automation makes a lot more sense. They're looking for drones that fly a lot further, that are a lot more autonomous. And I think when it comes to that, there's a big split between industrial drones and the consumer or prosumer sector. And on that side of things, safety and trust and what we talked about before becomes such a key part of the industry that that's almost the differentiator for any drone system or anyone who's buying or using drone systems into the future.
Right. But then if I had to ask you the following question, many big players like Intel, for example, are entering the drone market, one way or the other. Even NVIDIA, for example, they try to focus the TX1 and TX2 into the drone business. So where do you see the key technologies for the next generation of drones beyond GPS flight that will allow democratization to become faster and more universal, because there will be no need to know how to fly? And maybe you, David, can.
Yeah, I mean, so DJI clearly is going to be one of the biggest leaders in the space. I think we've seen it play out, though. Historically, smartphones and PCs are two areas that everyone can grasp really well. That there have been other players, but that you usually end up with two really dominant platforms. Right. I'm pretty bullish on DJI remaining one of those, but Intel is a good example of somebody who can come up. They can be the open source alternative. They can provide some of the software and the hardware specs. They don't build the actual drones. There's other companies that spring up around that build the actual the airframes. So while there's it's helpful, I think, for us to not have this 20 different platforms to build on top of. To only have, but we do need more than one, and then I think that's where you're going to see a lot more advancement in this kind of technology over time.
I think one of the great enablers of the drone industry up to now is consumer electronics. It's smartphones, really dropping sensor prices, making that a lot more reliable. What you just said in terms of NVIDIA, Intel, what we can do on processors now, especially embedded processors with extremely low power, we can do so much computation that, Iris automation wouldn't be possible even 2 years ago. And being able to use GPUs to be able to do essentially this visual processing that matches human vision, I think that's incredibly new technology that you just couldn't do in such a small form factor or such a low power consumption. And for us, we see that trend continuing. Cameras are so prevalent because every single person carries a camera around with them, that sort of technology, even dynamic range for cameras like this, we're very close to matching human vision. We're very close to matching what a pilot is able to do in real time. And I think it's that sort of trend that we ride on the drone side as well. And self-driving cars are a big part of that as well, and that starts pushing into the market. A lot of that sensor technology transfers to the drone space as well. And I think a lot of that reliability switches and allows this drone revolution, a lot of these industrial applications to take off in the same way that the consumer drone market took off.
Then, if I had, for example, a different question, when it comes to using the robot as a service provider, it's a worker essentially, right? That's a certain job for you. How do you see the use of robots inside the industry, the construction yard, and how do you see retraining a whole set of people that have the domain expertise, how to do inspection, with now using the drone as a tool for them, as part of their everyday business? And maybe you jump.
Yeah, we're doing this pretty broadly around the world in the construction quarrying market with Caterpillar, who's one of our partners, where dealerships around the world are starting to both leverage this technology so that they can provide technology-enabled services to their customers to help their customers understand things like how should they design the whole road within their site to get greater productivity? What's the right size truck given their needs and their constraints? And then in many cases, we see customers who initially may have a service provider come and fly the drone, deliver the business outcome and the data and information that they need, and then after 6 months say, you know what, that's actually really easy, it's really automated and the drones are really cheap now. We can just bring this in-house and we're going to operate it 10 times more frequently, get even more accurate and more timely information. And so we see a trend where it's starting with service providers, it's being brought in-house as people see how easy it is to use and how valuable it is for their organization. In insurance, we're seeing really insurance companies fall in kind of one or two camps. There are companies who want to enable their existing workforce to be more effective, more efficient. The drone represents a new kind of tool in their toolkit and a very valuable replacement in many cases for a ladder or ropes and harnesses. In other cases, insurance companies see this as an opportunity to get a lot more done with potentially fewer people, and to see this as a way to have a third-party service provider show up, get all of the information that you need to maybe pay out a claim, and not have to send your personnel out to that site at all. And for that company's customers, it represents the ability to maybe have your claim paid out without having ever have a person show up at your house.
I have two more questions. First of all, having a lot of drones in the city environment, then naturally some people will question, is this safe? Is this safe for me, even for my private data? So how would you comment, or what will you say about the concerns of people when it comes to privacy? And most of all, because that's going to be a generic discussion, what technologies will you prioritize in order to ensure safety as much as possible by design? And you, maybe Alexander, can start here.
I mean, that's a big part of what we do, right? You can have as many different radar systems on the ground or as many different transponders trying to coordinate where these drones go, and GPS technology has gotten very good, but there's things like tunnel effect or canyon effects inside cities that cause GPS outages. There's a lot of bandwidth issues. There's lost links to the drone itself. And so at some level, you always need the drone itself to be able to make some decision about navigation, about localization. And that's a big thing in what we're doing at Iris Automation. I think another big part of that is that the safety or the privacy part that you mentioned. I think, the fact that drones are in the sky gives a completely different vantage point, but I think it's part of this entire privacy conversation around cameras and lenses, and someone in a tower somewhere has almost a better vantage point than a drone flying around, because they can have a tripod and a very stabilized lens that they can zoom in on. Or I think in general there's online privacy that's much bigger concerns. The drones seem like a bigger privacy concern just because it's a lot more physical, it's a lot more present there. I think the trust and the safety is a much bigger part of what we should be focusing on for these sorts of technologies. I think something that's missed quite often is that these drones enable a lot of new technologies, or they enable a lot of new new advances or new applications that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. There's a lot of extremely dangerous jobs right now, like climbing up cell phone towers or inspecting power lines or just like forest firefighting, anything like this, where we put humans in harm's way because these like autonomous systems can't augment that yet. And I mean, that's a big part of this robotics industry as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, we always, it's that conflict you're getting at of privacy versus safety. Right? We run across this all the time and outside of drones in society, right? There's what level of privacy are people willing to give up in order to achieve a better, you know, societal outcome, and safety is usually a driver in it. And so that's one consideration. I agree, like, the smartphone, this is a great privacy violation device, right? Yet I've never walked into a bathroom or a locker room and been told I need to leave it outside the door, right? And that's just something we've been willing to take on because the phone has so many benefits. And the drone, this thing, you don't know if it's on, it's recording right now. I could be recording the whole audience, not that you would care, but on the drone, you hear that thing flying, right? I mean, I think as they get a little more, as they get smaller and more obscure, that becomes a bigger concern. But right now, you have a drone flying over your house, you know it's there, and the benefit of not having to put somebody up on a ladder, obviously if we're doing it on a permission basis, we have the consent of the property owner. You very likely to see other things in the surrounding area, but the trade-off is keeping somebody off of a ladder, keeping them out of harm's way, and also a lot of times the trade-off is actually going out there and looking when you otherwise weren't, right? So collecting data that was obscured before and you didn't know, and you had a lingering problem that wasn't getting addressed as a result of not having the drone go out there and collect that information.
Yes, we think the technology is as much of a solution to these concerns around privacy as it is the problem itself. If you had asked people, 10, 12 years ago, if everyone in the audience was willing to carry around what's essentially a GPS tracking device in your pocket, people would have probably thrown their hands in the air and said, not for me, I'm not doing that. And of course, everyone has exactly that in the form of your smartphone. But you also know that your smartphone has these, privacy settings where you can turn off the GPS, where you can decide what applications have access to the GPS information, where you can decide whether you share your location with other people in your friends or your family's network. And so that type of technology is being developed for drones as well. As an example of it, in our cloud-based technology, we are flying over residential homes all of the time with insurance carriers. I can tell you right now, there is no way to fly the drone and have every pixel and every image only land on the properties that you're interested in. There's always, in order, especially to collect 3D information, you need to always be collecting kind of images all around the area that you're interested in. But what we do is we automatically take the property boundaries from public information and databases, we create a geofence out of that, and then we remove all the pixels of imagery and information that fall outside of the property boundary, again, all without ever involving a human in any part of this. And so the end result of this is complete assurance for the insurance carrier, for the person whose property it is, and for the operator who shows up with the drone, that when the drone completes its flight, the only thing that they're going to be able to see is imagery of the house that was meant to be collected over.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great direction, right? Because then you try already from the data to eliminate as part of the concerns as possible.
And that's just an example. I mean, there's more and more technology being developed every day that's addressing a lot of these concerns around both safety and privacy.
But similar to Google Maps, like you won't see yourself at Google Maps, although Google at some point scanned you. Some simple guesstimates before we finish the discussion today and go to the Q&A. Drone delivery. Everybody discusses more or less about drone delivery, and everybody hopes that he can just order, his whatever from Amazon, and then it's going to be a drone picking up a thing and delivering it. When do you see this happening? And not in a rural area, not as a demo. When do you see it happen in New York or in San Francisco?
I'm a manned aircraft pilot, right. And I'm not as enthusiastic about drone delivery in probably metropolitan and populated areas, so maybe I'll leave others to answer that. But what I will say that I'm very, very excited about is companies like Zipline, who today have systems deployed operationally in countries where they're delivering really life-saving goods like vaccines and blood transfusions and medicine. And that's deployed today. I'm a little surprised it's not getting even more buzz and coverage than it is. But I think we're going to see that kind of course, naturally expand, but really start, over a pretty considerable time that I think really focused on applications where there is no other good alternative. I can walk out of here and decide I forgot my toothbrush, order it on Amazon.com, and still get it the same day.
Yeah.
And so I think some of the more urban drone delivery applications, it's not really clear, even if the technology is there 100%, whether the business case is there because of all the other good alternatives. Another application where we are seeing it today, and which I think is a great application, is anytime you need to deliver something to a site that's remote, maybe difficult to get to, an oil derrick, something like that, where production is stopped without this critical piece of hardware, where building is stopped, things like that.
Comments?
I'm very much of the same mindset as Jonathan. I think a big part of it is emergency services, blood deliveries, vaccine, and we're seeing that in places like Switzerland or Africa, or developing countries. I think there's a lot of rural settings in which emergency services like that make sense as well. In Australia, there's continuously doctors flying into the middle of nowhere for sort of routine operations, and a lot of that is just to bring small packages. It makes a lot of sense to do that. We're speaking more and more with companies that are looking at drones for cargo services, and I think that makes a lot of sense as well, even intercity or like ultimately intercontinental or across oceans. I think moving goods back and forth, especially critical items, is a huge importance. The really in downtown San Francisco or downtown New York, I think will take a long time, but like semi-urban or rural environments, I think that makes sense even in the next 5 years.
Cool. David?
Yeah, no, I'm just, the only other thing I would add is that, you're talking about densely packed urban environments, and this has even come up when talking about agricultural use cases where everyone's assuming it's an aerial drone, but I think there's a lot of use cases for autonomous vehicles that are ground-based. And so we always, and even in our world, when we think about aerial imagery, it's not always the drone imagery is the best tool for the job. Sometimes that's complete overkill, and there's cheaper alternatives to use other forms of aerial imagery.
Thank you. I'll just put some closing remarks from my side and to give it to Q&A. I also want to comment that drones, beyond all the potential in market, is also an exciting research field. And I think one of the reasons for democratization is because some amazing people, our students, they actually want to work in this technology, and some of the best, I think, tend to be attracted by robotics, in particular from aerial robots this time. So at this stage, I would like to thank you all for the discussion, and also to give it to Q&A for you if you have any particular question for our speakers. Yeah.
Thanks. Almost everything you guys talked about was eliminating humans out of remedial jobs that are being performed today. On the operational side, do you actually see jobs being created by drones? And if so, where?
I think a lot of that is extension of human capability. I mean, part of it is that safety use case that we talked about before, but when we're talking about being able to fight forest fires with drones or doing pipeline inspections, very often when we talk to oil and gas companies, they employ something called community-based detection for gas leaks. And essentially that means some random farmer is going to phone up and let someone at the oil and gas company know that there's a leak in the pipeline. If we can do that much more, if we can bring drone technology cheap enough and autonomously enough to be able to do that sort of inspection on a much more frequent basis, I think we save a lot of environmental destruction in that way. And I think things like that create a lot of jobs. I think a lot of it is more of a tool of extension rather than replacement.
Yeah, I would just say we're using humans are in part of every part of our process. The data capture, we're sending a person out with a drone. With the data analysis, we have humans driving that, even though it's getting more and more over time assisted by artificial intelligence. But the humans, but all this is leading to capturing information that otherwise maybe was being missed, right? So the depth and the breadth of the information being captured increases thanks to the drones and all these autonomous tools, and so that drives more interventions as well. So I think it's like ultimately you find that there's a problem. What do you do about it? So once again, that's human driven on the intervention side. So it's shifting things around maybe a little bit here and there, but overall, the goal is just create more information so that we have better, more targeted action.
We're seeing with a lot of jobs where people have historically been doing them, they're doing that job for a certain site like once a quarter, like assessing the volumetrics of stockpiles as an example. And with the introduction of drone technology, people are still very involved throughout this entire process, but the fact is that companies are just consuming more. They're doing a lot more of these inspections. They're doing, in the commercial underwriting market as an example, most commercial underwriters inspect a relatively low percentage of the commercial buildings that they underwrite, and they use some kind of rules of thumb and they use some metrics. But by making this so much easier to inspect a commercial building for water intrusion, for damage, for things like that, they're doing more of these inspections than they would have done otherwise because it's impacting the loss ratio of the carrier. And so we're seeing a little bit of everything. We're seeing there's some jobs where there's just going to be less jobs in that area because of automation and because of robotics. In other areas, we're seeing a swell and the need to hire a lot of people because the value being delivered by that type of inspection is increasing and the frequency of the inspection is increasing. And then the last thing I would say is that one of the things we're really excited about is we're seeing this as a technology that is really impacting the ability for people to do their jobs longer. There's a lot of inspections, whether it's climbing up on cell phone towers, whether it's climbing up on 2-story steep rooftops that are dangerous and are considered kind of a young person's job, where historically people have often kind of aged out of these jobs. And we're giving them the ability to apply everything they've learned throughout their career in terms of understanding damage, being able to work with the customer, helping manage the claims process, but without having to climb up on the rooftop. So they can actually leverage all of their expert advice and expertise longer throughout their career.
Right, and I want to comment that there has never been such a thing like huge change in technology, no change in society. So this will necessarily, in robotics it will happen too. And the key direction that one has to think is, can we make the work better? Not just replace what we are doing so far, but to do exactly that, do the work better, more systematic, do the same quality of end product, or even better, with less effort, and keep the same pay, right? That will be at least one direction to start from. Different question?
Yeah, my question was related to business model. So if I am, say, my company is purely analytics, and I want some very specific information, then is it going to be shortly that I just have a drones as a service, and I just say, okay, I just want to collect this particular data, sample at this rate with this particular type of sensor, and the service provider who manages all these fleets of drones, they just connect me up in the cloud or something and I can get what I want. So is that the kind of business models that would develop?
We definitely see that evolving and developing, and we think that's where the market is going, but we also think this is a really early market and it's not going to happen overnight. And I think some people maybe have the idea that that's going to happen tomorrow and there's suddenly going to be a drone operator wherever you need them, whenever you need them, and all you need to do is hook up to them over an API and then you're going to be able to deliver the stuff. And what I would say is just, it's going to take a little while to get there. We see the more successful businesses today being the ones where, in many cases, they are working directly with the customers, they may be leveraging service providers, they're developing technology, and they're driving a business outcome. And over time, just like we see today, tens of thousands of companies that build applications on top of a platform like Salesforce, I believe that over time, similarly, much of this technology is going to evolve into platforms so that the data can, it's obfuscated to a data analysis company, maybe like yours, who's collecting the data, where and when, and you can focus just on tying in via APIs, leveraging that to drive analytics and insights that might otherwise not be available.
We have one last question over here, and then we move Alexander, I'm sure you'll have an interesting insight into this, but I'd love to hear everyone's input. What are your opinions on ground-based collision avoidance systems versus on-vehicle collision avoidance systems, especially with respect to the future of beyond visual line of sight flight?
Sure. I mean, we've looked a lot at radar technology, and a lot of airports already have radar technology around them, and that makes a lot of sense for those certain controlled areas. But to be able to expand that sort of radar coverage or on-the-ground-based coverage to the entire continental US just doesn't make sense at all. We're talking about trillions of dollars in terms of infrastructure costs, and we're not going to do that. I think it's easy to look at the self-driving car market and draw a lot of parallels from that. I think the easiest way to integrate self-driving cars in the safest way would be to take all the human drivers off the road and to just have self-driving cars and install like transmitters and wireless systems in every single traffic light across the whole US and have them all talk to each other and communicate, but that's just not practical in any way. And I think it's the same thing with self-driving cars. It makes sense for that car to mimic human actions, to have this real-time situational awareness around the vehicle and integrate into the current system the way a human driver drives. I think it's the same thing with aircraft. There's something like 500,000 private pilots in the US, and all of them are going to keep flying. There's a lot of systems that are already in place. The national airspace is extremely complex and very busy, and like the drone industry is not going to change that, at least not for the next 5 or 10 years, and we're going to have to find a way to adapt into that current model. There's already a lot of pilots that are flying under visual flight rules, and essentially what we've gone ahead and done is create this system, this software and AI that allows these drones to see the world the way a pilot does and fit into that same airspace, into that same model in a very seamless way. That means no real regulation has to change. There doesn't need to be a big difference in terms of trust. We don't need to have like a monumental shift in terms of infrastructure. And so that's going to be the easiest and most likely rollout of this sort of technology, especially for beyond visual line of sight and safe integration into the airspace.
And I would say also from a robustness perspective, by design, it's better to have a network of intelligent agents rather than assuming that there's going to be a network of, only based on ground information and a perfectly reliable system of network, relatively dumb robots that just have to rely on this information. It's better to make each one of them able to do something on its own, collision avoidance, for example, and then exploit the ground information rather than, hooking everything with information from the ground.
It's a little bit scary to be tied to this one central model just because you need continuous communication. We're talking about relying on real-time systems, relying on their connection to the cloud or to some central architecture. And even if we mandate every single drone in the world to have transponders or to have a certain data connection or to have a certain separation criteria based on this ground-based system, there's still going to be non-cooperative air traffic. Even if a big part of that non-cooperative air traffic is birds and ultralights and balloons and gliders, and ultimately you're always going to need some sort of real-time situational awareness to keep everything really safe, because even 1% of all the air traffic is going to cause a lot of fatalities and a lot of actual collisions that we want to avoid with that real-time awareness.
Yep. So thank you. At this point, we are out of time in any case, so I would like to thank you all for attending this session, and thanks to all of our speakers.